Hello and welcome to the Real-esteem Podcast. Today is January the 22nd, 2018. I'm your host, Patrick Tabor, and today on the Identity Edition, we're going to talk about peer pressure. For those of you who are still struggling with your identity, you're still trying to find out who you really are, or to try to find out the complete person that you really are, who God created you to be. It gets kind of difficult when peer pressure gets involved, or you have all these different examples to look at to see if you fit in to those standards or those aspects in your life. And sometimes you just don't. You just don't fit into those areas, those arenas. Sometimes you try hard to try to find your place, but it's better to know your identity, and then that helps you find your place. It's better to know your identity, and then you can see what's good for you to do and what's not good for you to do. It's best to know your identity because then it's easier to follow what God has for you as opposed to what, others may try to pressure you into. Sometimes the pressure is, they're unaware. They're not trying to purposely pressure you into something you don't want to do. Sometimes people are just trying to get you involved in certain things that they like to do, and it's not always their fault, or it's not always a negative on their part. You just need to know who you are so that you can say no when you need to. In Galatians 1:10, it says, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." So immediately, one of the first things you have to do is get out of your mind that you're going to be able to please people. That should never be your focus. You care about people. You want to do right by people. You want to treat others the way you want to be treated. And that's all good and well. But, your goal is not to try to make people happy all the time, because if you focus on that, people will drive you crazy. And it's not that their purpose is to drive you crazy. It's just, you yourself can probably drive somebody else crazy if you were trying to get them to be pleased all the time. If you were trying to, get people to please you all the time. So really, truthfully, you cannot follow man and try to get his approval all the time on everything, because you're going to be sadly disappointed. Even when you try very hard and do all the right steps, there's going to be times where you disappoint them and you're not going to please them. And it's just life. Even in a marriage, that doesn't occur all the time. You don't always please your husband or your wife. It's just, your friends, your best friends. You don't always please them. Your parents or your brothers and sisters, you don't always please them. It's just a part of life. They don't always please you. That's the way it really is. But can you get past that and know your identity regardless of that, and just have some kind of standards set by that identity that God's given you? 1 Corinthians 15:33-34 says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. Wake up from your drunken stupor, as is right, and do not go on sinning. For some have no knowledge of God. I say this to your shame." That's pretty, it's pretty powerful. If you know your identity, then that should make it easier for you to minister to other people. And when I say minister, I don't mean that you spend time beating people over the head with scriptures in the Bible and trying to make people feel bad or convict them of things. Most people are already convicted about the things that they're doing that may not be right. They don't need your help to add the pain of that. They just need to know, well, how do I change this? How do I get out of this? How do I find out who I am so I can say no to the things that are not helping me in life? In Acts 5:27 and 29, the Sadducees were telling Jesus, not Jesus, but they had arrested the apostles and Peter, and they were telling them, we don't want you to teach this stuff about Jesus. And verse 27 says, "And when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest questioned them, saying, 'We strictly charge you not to teach in this name. Yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you intend to bring this man's blood upon us.' But Peter and the apostles answered, 'We must obey God rather than man.'" So it is better for you to find out what God says about you and your identity and follow his path, whatever it is he's telling you to do. It's not for other people to dictate and direct what you're supposed to be doing above God. You have to obey God rather than man. Not to say that God may not use a man to give you insight, to give you understanding, or to even prophesy. But remember, prophecy comes when God's already spoken to you. God's already told you some of these things, or has been trying to tell you these things in some form or fashion. So when you hear a prophecy, it should be a confirmation of something you already know. It's not something spooky. It should be something that resonates with you already. So in that, knowing who you are is so important and so valuable to all the decisions you're going to make in your future that you really need to find out who that is. If you are not a public person and you don't always enjoy being around good people, well, guess what? There's two things that's going to happen. That is probably part of your identity in one sense. If it's not just that you're scared and fearful of people and shy all the time, God will always try to pull you out of things that are not good for you, that are going to hinder your future or your call or your walk with him. He will always put you in circumstances that are contrary to what you may feel like doing. But as you may be, in a sense, an introverted type person where you are okay being by yourself, that's not a bad thing. That might be part of your identity, but you have to know how to manage that so that that doesn't control your life totally, that you just don't want to be around people, period, that you ignore people and you stay away from people. That's not good either, because if you are a child of God, you are going to have to minister to somebody in some form or fashion, some type of servant nature, and you can't do that unless you're going to be around people. I mean, who are you going to minister to if you're by yourself all the time? So just remember, don't allow those things that are in your identity to reign. Allow God to reign. It says we must obey God rather than man. And he wants you to know your identity so you can say no to the things that are going to be a hindrance to you, and you can say yes to him and all the things that he requires and asks of you. And just remember, everything God asks you to do is not fun, but I promise you, some of it will be. And you have to believe that, because if you don't believe that, you won't get to see the fruit that comes from you enjoying ministry. I hope you got something out of this today. Be blessed. Remember, your identity is important. I pray that you get God on your side and stay focused on what he wants you to do, and listen to what he calls you and what he says you are, as opposed to what other people. You can do what you want to try to compare them, but just remember what he says is the most valuable thing to you. All right. Take care. Grace and peace.